Shalom Aleichem, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Shmoozing with Avi. We have a very special guest, so special that we actually took it out of the regular order of our programs remembering the Holocaust, but this was too important to wait. And so I will tell you about an amazing book and the person who brought it to life. Joel Poremba is a business attorney with years of litigation experience in both state and federal courts. Prior to this, Joel litigated against billion-dollar insurance companies over breached disability policies. So I'm glad I knew about the book first, because I'd say, all right, what are we talking about? He's also the son of Holocaust survivor Nathan Peremba. It took 21 years and an inspiring trip to Israel for Joel to finally watch his father's testimony to the Shoah Foundation Visual History Archive. He was stunned, as was I, because it took me about that long to see my father's testimony. Determined, Joel sat down and he further interviewed his father about the details of his Holocaust survival. And that resulted in the amazing book, My Name is Staszek Surdel. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, which explores Nathan Peremba's life and survival in Poland before, during, and after World War II. And isn't it ironic that today we are dealing with such similar situations in the exact same areas? Never again is now. Making good on his bar mitzvah speech to one day tell his father's story, Joel Poremba is the author with a passion for telling his father's story of resistance. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored to have with us today, Joel Poremba. Joel, please join us.
Thank you so much for having me, Avi.
I'm so looking forward to this schmooze for so many reasons. Most of my viewers know that you and I share the incredible blessing and burden of being children of Holocaust survivors. And you and I also share the distinction of having parents who had an amazing story to tell and getting their books out in public. And so could you tell our viewers about your upbringing? You know, where was your family from? Where were you born? Where did you grow up? How did you grow up? What was the Jewish environment? Because, you know, people, unlike you and me, who are not children of survivors, really live a very different kind of Jewish life. And so, you know, I think it's important that we share ours.
I was born in Los Angeles. My mom from Toronto, Canada, and my dad from Weliczka, Poland. After the war, my dad came to New York in 1951 as a displaced person, and about 10 years later wound up in Los Angeles, where he met my mom about 5-6 years later. I was raised in the Valley in Los Angeles. My mom was a traditional Reform Jew. That's how she was raised. My father in southeastern Poland was definitely, I guess, what you would call today a conservadox Jew, as most people were in that area of Poland. But after the war, I think in his heart, he was still a conservative / Orthodox Jew, but in practice, not very observant. However, a conservative shul was just 10 doors down from our house. So naturally, my parents sent us there for nursery school, and then they had a Hebrew day school that was only a couple years old. And I ended up being there from kindergarten through 6th, and that was Kadima Hebrew Academy. And then I went to another private Hebrew day school in Los Angeles, Herzl Schools. So even though my parents weren't very religious, I went to Minyan 4 or 5 days a week. Partially because that was the school that required it. I went to Shabbat services every single Saturday for all the way through high school. At that time, I was fluent in Hebrew. So I think my brother and I were more religious than our parents. because we went to shul every Saturday and I was at Minyan almost every day of the school week. But my parents didn't go, other than Passover and then for the high holidays, sometimes Simchat Torah and Sukkot. But so to sum it up, my brother and I grew up more religious than my parents. Our schoolmates were more religious. They were Shomer Shabbos, kept kosher. We kind of modified both rules. So I think I grew up more religious than most people I know today.
Wow. I mean, you know, it's interesting because you and I talked about it before we started the schmooze. You know, my father came out of Auschwitz and said, there is no God. And so this whole concept of people coming out of the Holocaust experience, you know, believing in God or not believing in God and to what degree is fascinating to me. Did you guys speak Yiddish at home? Did your dad speak Yiddish?
My dad would tell jokes in Yiddish, use the traditional curse words in Yiddish when he was getting after my brother and myself. My mom understood it, but didn't really speak it. My maternal grandmother speak and understood it. And whenever my dad would speak to what little family survived in New York and Columbia, it would be a full-on Yiddish fest conversation, and I didn't really understand much of it. I saw Claude Lanzmann's show twice, which was more than 20 hours out of my life watching that. And obviously, one of the themes was the silent passing of trains, just hearing the sound of the train, no narration, no subtitles. And, you know, when I saw it the second time, I was still pretty young, in my late teens. I didn't understand what that stood for. But then when I read some reviews, I understood it was supposed to be, where's God in all this in the Holocaust? So I understand what you're saying, how your dad came out. And unfortunately, a lot of Jews that survived the Holocaust had those feelings. Where was God? My dad and I never had philosophical conversations about that, but I can tell you there was an undercurrent growing up of him wondering why did he survive, but his parents didn't? Why did he survive? Why did three of his sisters not? On my grandfather's side, over 200, almost 250 members of the family were wiped out. So that constituted about 98% of the family. 100% was wiped out on my grandmother's side. Yeah, so my dad came out wondering why, but again, we didn't really have that conversation. But who wouldn't that bother? You know, who would have survived all that and not asked why or how, and why me? Why did I survive? And
Sure.
yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot of philosophical
survivor guilt
yeah.
is a very known commodity, and you and I unfortunately share some of the genetic damage of that. Which camps was your father in? I mean, did he ever talk about it when you were a kid?
No. So for 31 years, I understood what the Holocaust was maybe at the age of 5 or 6, because there was one photograph in the house of my father as a 2-year-old with his entire family. And I'll just quickly put that up. So that's one of the 2 photographs that my father was able to recover after the Holocaust when he returned back to his town. So the only son in that photo is my father. This was approximately 1932. My dad was 2 years old there. My grandparents at both ends, and 3 older sisters that were murdered. And my dad actually survived with the sister he's sitting next to in the front row there.
And where did he survive from?
So my dad was in 3 different ghettos: the Miehov ghetto, the Krakow ghetto, and the Bochnia ghetto. And he did a brief amount of time in Plaszow and in Bergen-Belsen. And the reason he was in those 2 camps was, the book is called My Name is Stashik Serdel. Those were the false papers. That was the false identity my father had in 1942. So that's how he survived the last 3 years of the war on a farm in Babice, Poland, which is north of Krakow, north of Miehov. And he had an altercation with a German soldier that he was tasked with bringing dairy products to every day. But that was one of his duties, working on a farm. false identity, and it was a drunk soldier, thinking that he was a Pole. And Germans would abuse Poles all the time, especially teenagers. And my father spilled some of the milk onto the ground, so the drunk soldier started harassing and then physically abusing my father. And my father, in an act of resistance, as he had been doing for the 3 years prior to that, kicked into the ground, and it splashed mud on the soldier's nicely shined boots. So he beat my father to a pulp, rendered him unconscious. And when my dad woke up, he was on a train without knowing where he was going to Bergen-Belsen, because he was being treated as a prisoner of war because he had assaulted a German soldier. But the farm owner was more of a drunk himself than a worker, and he wasn't able to produce any crops, let alone the dairy that the Germans needed up the road. And there was a fortress that they were manning up the road from the farm. And so this fortress was from World War I, and it was repopulated by the Germans in World War II. And they were trying to create a defensive line should the Russians ever push west, which of course they did. So this was the fortress that my father brought dairy products to. So he had escaped the Krakow ghetto and left for the countryside because he was fearful that the Gestapo were eventually going to find him, because they had come into the shoe shop that he was working as an apprentice in undercover. And it scared him. So he looked for work outside of the cities. So little did he know that the farm that he was working at up the road was this German fortress. And one of the things he had to do was bring dairy products to the soldiers every day. So after that altercation, my father wound up in those two camps. The farm owner secured his release because he wanted his free labor back. So my father spent a number of weeks in each camp. He was mistakenly transferred from Bergen-Belsen to Plaszow when he was supposed to be brought back to the farm. And he was peeling potatoes and treated like any other POW. And, at that time, my dad had 3+ years of experience muting his emotions when he saw what was going on in the Holocaust, how Jews were being treated and where they were winding up, because there he was in camps and he could see his fellow Jews, and he had to show no emotion, ask no questions. So he had a lot of experiences prior to that sort of trained him in that regard. So that's that part of the book.
Wow. Okay. So we kind of jumped ahead to the book, but I'm glad.
We did. We can go back.
Well, no, I'm just fascinated that, I was always surrounded by the Holocaust. My father never talked about his story either. But I was always, Holocaust was always around me. And eventually my father did the Shoah history, the visual history archive. And I watched it and I was stunned. So I'm curious, you became a lawyer and a good lawyer. Apparently you have sued some really, major companies in billion-dollar, litigations. What was the jump? I mean, when, obviously tell us a little bit about becoming a lawyer and that life. And what was that transition? When did that happen for you, that you suddenly took on this amazingly passionate, need, a mission, really, to tell your father's story?
So as I was saying earlier, before I think I interrupted myself with part of the story, I was aware that my father was a survivor. I would ask questions when I was 5-6 years old, after I showed you the picture of my father's family. Where are these people? I have so many cousins and aunts and uncles and grandparents on my mom's side. Where's everyone on your side? And he just bluntly said they were all murdered in the Holocaust. But that was it. I was a little boy. There would be no follow-up questions. Obviously, going to Hebrew private schools, the topic of the Holocaust came up early and often. And over the years, I asked more and more questions, and my father didn't want to talk about it.
I have a question. Did your father speak with an accent?
Yeah, a heavy accent.
So, okay. And how did that affect you growing up? Was that something that, obviously it's different than the other kids,
Yeah, I mean, my
especially
dad,
in LA.
right. I mean, yeah, I mean, my dad didn't have an education. I mean, the Germans were in his town September 7th, 1939, and uh, schools were closed. Jews couldn't go to school. So my dad's education stopped right there. Over the years, he picked up a little bit of Russian, a little bit of German, spoke obviously fluent Polish and fluent Yiddish. But yeah, he had a heavy accent. And a lot of people would meet my dad and they would say, "Where are you from?" And he would always say, "I'm from New York." Well, that's where he was from 51 to 61. But my dad didn't want, it was his way of deflecting. He didn't want to get into it. He didn't want to say, "I'm from Poland." And then it leads to eventually to, you survived the Holocaust, you lost your whole family. So that's what I grew up hearing him always say, "I'm from New York." But no one ever bought it because he didn't sound like a New Yorker. He sounded like an Eastern European with multiple broken dialects going on, and no one could figure out. But that was my dad's defensive wall. So for 31 years, I chased my dad around the house, literally asking questions, and he didn't want to talk about it. His survivor friends would be in the house often. The best people I've ever met in my life, they were closed down, shut down too. They didn't want to talk about it. Some of them had tattoos on their arms. I'd ask about it and they would just deflect. They didn't want to talk about it. Speed up to Schindler's List coming out. And then shortly after that, and I had seen the movie the first time with my father. And when we walked out, he revealed two things almost out of nowhere, but obviously it was accredited to just walking out of Schindler's List. He said, "I snuck in and out with the Schindler Jews in and out of that gate, the Krakow gate. And I timed my comings and goings to this large group." He didn't know who they were. He didn't know where they were going. They didn't have a name, Schindler Jews. And I thought, that's new information. He's never said that before. I'm sure there's a whole story that goes with it and information on both ends, but he didn't want to talk about it. And then he said, and the camp that they showed in the movie Ploshov, I was there. Didn't want to answer any questions about that. So shortly after the movie, they established the foundation and they're taking testimony. And my dad was absolutely against doing it. And it took to 1998. And slowly, each one of his survivor friends were doing it. And he was the last one. And I never thought he would. So on that day, they're in the house for 7-8 hours, collecting 4 hours of testimony. And I was tucked away in the back of the house, giving my father his privacy and the videographer and the interviewer plenty of space. I got bored. I snuck out and I went up to a door that had slats and I could clearly hear the interview. And I heard two additional details that I had never heard before. And one was how he said goodbye to his mother in 1942. He had an inkling about the deportations for his town. And he said, "I'm not going to stay around wondering if it's going to happen or not. All these rumors are driving me crazy. I want to live. I am leaving." And he was 12 years old telling his mother this. He wasn't asking, he was telling. So it was very difficult for him to tell this. He was crying. I was crying just hearing it. And I walked away. And about an hour later, I came.
How old were you when this happened?
30. It was 1998. So I was 31.
So you're like a successful lawyer who's got, his whole life ahead of him, and suddenly there you are.
Yeah. And then I heard him tell another story about the sister he survived with being picked up by the Gestapo. She had false papers too. My father and his sister had a brother-sister false paper thing set up. So they both had the last name Serdell, but cousins split them up to increase the odds that one or both would survive. So he was describing how the Gestapo tortured her psychologically, emotionally, physically, and very hard for him to tell. And it was hard for me to hear. So long story short, when the interview was done and the tapes were provided, I couldn't watch it. The two things I had heard absolutely paralyzed me. And I thought, what else could I possibly hear? I can't bear it. The interview had the opposite effect on my dad. He became all loosey-goosey. Now he wanted to talk to anyone and anywhere, but I couldn't do it. So then the shoe was on the other foot and he was chasing me around for the next 21 years. And nothing was going to change for me. I knew I was running out of time. My dad was getting up there in years. I ended up going to Israel in 2018, and I write about this experience in the epilogue. And that experience completely changed my perspective. I came back home. I told my dad I was going to do it. Truth be told, it took me another 6 months to actually sit down and watch the video. Very difficult to do. It took me 2 nights and several boxes of tissues. When I was done, I just announced to my dad, I've seen it, and now I'm ready to continue the discussion because I have a lot of questions. So I recorded another 10 hours of sit downs with him. And, I was trying to make good on something I said at my bar mitzvah during my Dvar Torah, that I would tell my dad's story. And, I really still was hurt and not ready to do it. So it took another year for me to actually do it after I interviewed him. And I started writing in March of 2020.
But what's amazing is at your bar mitzvah, you had no idea. You just knew, oh, yes, I'm a child of a survivor and I need to tell my father's story. It was kind of typical Hebrew school,
Bravado.
Young
without knowing
kid.
what
Right.
path I was going to take. And obviously I didn't know his story. And I'll tell you a short story. 2 years later, the shul invited alumni bar and bat mitzvahs to come back, get an aliyah, give a short Dvar Torah. And I again announced that I was going to I'm the son of a survivor. One day I'm going to tell my father's story. And a regular shul goer came up to me during the luncheon and said, I was at your bar mitzvah 2 years ago, and I heard you make this bold statement. And I heard you do this again today. Tell me, what have you done in the last 2 years to advance this?
Wow.
I'm 15 years old. I'm punching above my weight. He lays that on me. I looked at him clueless, and I didn't know what to say. So I said, well, I've been studying for my driver's exam. And he just patted me on the back and walked away. And the look and the pat was communicated, you have no idea what you're in for.
Right. And, needless to say, that was very memorable because you're telling me the story.
Never forgot about it.
Right.
Yeah, easier said than done. I'm going to tell my dad's story. I'm going to sit down and get it from him emotionally, psychologically, historically. Completely different thing to actually be able to do it. When you're hearing about someone suffering, it's never easy. When you're hearing about your fellow Jew suffering because you're Jewish, it hurts a little more. When I hear about the Holocaust, it's just too painful to talk. And when it's your own parent,
then
it's your flesh and blood. And to hear what your father suffered and lost, I couldn't do it. After listening to just 2 things during his live interview, I couldn't watch it.
And can you imagine that today in Ukraine, there are 12-year-old boys who are turning to their parents and saying, I'm afraid. I'm hearing all these rumors. They're coming. They're bombing right outside. I'm going. And then you have 3 million refugees. I don't know how many today already. Just like your father, just like my mother, just like my father. It's stunning. Before we get into the actual writing of the book, as a lawyer, I'm very curious because I happen to know several lawyers who work in the field of Holocaust, litigation. There was, if I'm not mistaken, a Supreme Court case all about the Allianz insurance companies who refused to pay off the insurance policies for the Jews who, were taken and had insurance policies at the time. Did you ever think about, mixing your litigation, your lawyering with your Holocausting?
No, because it's too emotional for me to get involved professionally. I never felt I could. First of all, that I didn't pursue that as a career path. I mean, I was aware of Holocaust litigation in the mid 2000s. It never ever was tempting enough for me to apply. And I'm the son of a Holocaust survivor. I'm a litigator. I want to join your team and crusade up the mountain. How was I going to litigate on behalf of him and other Jews? I couldn't mix emotion with professionalism.
Mhm.
And touching on what you were saying, I've represented people who have been harmed in terrible ways, both financial and physical. And to represent them, although not easy, I don't have any emotional ties to them. So it's a job and I have a duty, and it's easy to walk the straight and narrow. But I couldn't even talk to my own father for so many years.
Right.
I knew myself well enough. That's not a pool I'm going to tread in at all.
Hmm. I'm asking for a reason. As I said, I have done a lot of research and work in this particular field. Actually, last month for Yom HaShoah, we had an interview with an organization called Kavod Ensuring Dignity. And the only reason I bring it up is because one of the things we learned from them is there are 30% of the existing still alive Holocaust survivors in America today who live below the poverty line. And their work as an organization is to help them, those who have needs, to help provide them with their needs. But one of the things we talked about was this idea that, there are still Holocaust survivors today who don't make enough to eat. And so, there are, I'm sure, legal and litigations and claims conferences and all sorts of organizations that do that. But I thought maybe you want to jump back in the ring and help.
No, for the same reason. I just can't mix the emotion, the bias with what I do professionally. I think I would probably come out on the other end, either not liking my profession enough to do it anymore, or maybe not wanting to support these stories, in particular my dad's. So it's something that was an easy avoid for me.
I mean, the fact that it's still an issue is a good reason for you.
I mean, but by implication, short example, I mean, how many millions of Jews left their homes in Poland, just Poland, because my dad was from there.
Right.
And someone survived and they came back to their business or their home, and there's Poles living in there and they won't leave.
That's my mother's story. That's my grandparents.
Right. Same thing happened to my dad.
To their house in Lodz. There was another family living there, and they said, "Hey, we're back." And they said, "No, you're not, because we'll just kill you." And so,
and what the woman said to my father when he knocked on the door is, "Why are you alive?" She assumed that the Nazis had done a good enough job that he shouldn't be here. The town had deportation orders. And when she was all upset, thinking my dad was going to dislodge her from the home, she said when he brought a Russian officer over because he was getting flack from the lady, she said that my dad violated, at that time, German law by not reporting for deportation. My dad was long gone from Velichka. He was in Krakow and then on his way to Babice, to the farm. So the nerve of her to say that my father violated the then existing law by not showing up for deportation, that he should have been killed, is what she's saying, because everyone was sent to Belzec on that day. That was her response. She was so hostile. And, the brief time my father spent in his town after the Holocaust, teenage boys saw that he had survived and they threatened to kill him. I mean,
well, that's actually a great segue to the next question. So obviously, you found out the information, you interviewed your dad, he interviewed you, he forced you in, basically you eventually got the information. Now what? So now you're going to write a book. How does that happen? And tell us the evolution of the writing of the book, the publishing of the book, and tell us, as you are, some of the amazing details of your father's inspiring life.
So it took a 2018 trip to Israel, which was my first time in Israel. And it was with a group that really changed my perspective and made me realize, if my father was unable to tell his story, is it going to die with him? And it cannot. There are at least a dozen reasons why his story needed to be told, and why every survivor's story needed to be told and still needs to be told, because the world doesn't believe it ever happened, or it believes that the numbers are exaggerated, and it believes that the anti-Semitism that preceded the war and occurred during the war and occurred after the war in Europe also didn't exist. So my book covers all three phases of pre, during, and post-Holocaust, the anti-Semitism my father witnessed and experienced. And it started as early as when he was 5 years old. Velichka, about half the town was Jewish, but the other half was very anti-Semitic, just like many other Polish towns.
Continue the story, please. So now you are writing the book. I mean, the anti-Semitism we know about. The anti-Semitism exists today. The anti-Semitism is growing today, both in the United States and in Europe and around the world. And as we see what's happening in Ukraine and what's been happening in Ukraine, this is a problem that never goes away.
So when my father was 5 years old, my grandfather had a bus line that ran from all around Velichka and then up to Krakow and back. And a famous national champion wrestler got on my grandfather's bus, well-known anti-Semite. My dad didn't remember his name. My dad was 5 years old at the time. And he refused to pay the fare. And out of his mouth came, Jew this, Jew that, Jews are rats, blah, blah, blah. Well, my grandfather was already known in Velichka as someone that you didn't mess with. And if he would come around the corner and he saw an anti-Semitic attack, either verbal or physical, it would end immediately. He was a tall man with a deep voice, and he had a calm, soothing effect on people, and apparently on anti-Semitic situations. He wasn't going to let this champion Polish wrestler ride for free and slur him in front of all the passengers. So my grandfather asked him to get off the bus. He got off the bus, and they had a fight. My father tells it that my grandfather won the fight, but was terribly injured. But the municipality took away my grandfather's license because they believed the wrestler's story that my grandfather had started the incident but they never interviewed any of the passengers. So my dad was aware of this, obviously, when he was 5 years old. And then a year later, the cheder wouldn't enroll my dad. The headmaster said he was too small, and that my grandmother should fatten him up before he could come back. Well, my grandmother wasn't going to wait the year out, so she enrolled him in the public school, which was just full of anti-Semites, but from the principal to the teachers to the students. And my father experienced anti-Semitism at the age of 6, right off the bat. The kids would come into the classroom and bat him on the head as they would take their seats every single day. My father wasn't going to complain to his parents, to the teachers, or the principals. He felt it would only inflame the situation, because at the end of the day, nothing was going to be done. So my father used to get a little stipend from his parents, a couple pennies every day, to buy snacks on the way home from school. So he picked the biggest bully in the class that was doing this with the other students. And he said, I will pay you a few pennies every day if you stop it and get the rest of the class to stop. And they did. And he did this all on his own, my father. 3 years later, it was May of 1939. Hitler had already given his Reichstag speech in January 1939, saying he was going to destroy European Jewry. And the Velichka municipality issued a license for everyone to put up banners and placards, highly anti-Semitic, all over town in front of Jewish businesses, synagogues, signs going from a lamppost from one side of the street to the other. And they said, Jews are Christ killers, Jews eat children, Jews leave Poland now. My grandfather waited till a Sunday, till everyone was in church, and he went around and took my father by hand and took down all the signs, all of them. And a police officer came out. He knew my grandfather, and he said, they're going to kill you when they come out of church. You should stop. And my grandfather said, absolutely not. I'm tired of this. They came out of church. They made a circle around my grandfather, and they just applauded, because no one was ever going to harm my grandfather when everyone knew what he was doing was right. So these three events, the wrestler, the assaults in public school, and then watching my grandfather take down all these placards, that's the foundation that my father grew up with, of not standing around and sort of fighting back. So when the Germans rolled in, the Wehrmacht rolled in on September 7th, they immediately started doing, and I'm going to show you some photos. This is the main square in Velichka. This is like 1920, 1922.
Wow, I need to get a copy of these pictures, please. If you
Absolutely.
Right.
So you just sort of memorize the building in the background,
Sure.
you know, the steeple, the bold windows, and you see the cobblestone road. And this is obviously in the 1920s, but this is beginning September 7th, 1939. Same road, same building in the back. And this was the beginning of the Germans lining up Jews, making them sweep an already disheveled, useless cobblestone road, just for the purpose of humiliating them and instilling fear into the Jewish community. Standing behind them are German.
Let me just add something really quick. So the wheelbarrows, what they used to do very often is have them go from side to side and carry very heavy rocks, just drag them to the other side of the
for no purpose,
drop them off, and then take more rocks and move them back to the other side.
Right.
And it was just torture.
It was torture and humiliation.
Yeah.
So I drew blue arrows showing every German soldier and all the trucks that were armed behind the Jews, and you can clearly see they were handed brooms. Wow. The thickest blue arrow, the second one on the left, that soldier has the Totenkopf on his black lapel.
Right. Tell people what that is, because some people.
That's the Death's Head unit, but no one knew what that was. Obviously, between September 7th and 11th, 1939. First, the Wehrmacht came into Velichka, and then shortly after that came an SS contingent. And this is, again, September 7th to the 11th, same square, making Orthodox Jews sweep. And the one man that has a bucket, he was lucky because he was being asked to pick up horse dung, because contrary to popular belief, only 15% of the German army was actually mechanized.
And there's the name Unger.
That's right. Leon Unger. My dad said that most of the Jews that were forced to pick up horse dung had to put it in their pockets. They were not given a bucket.
Wow.
But this is what my dad was seeing for 4 days from the 7th.
Pictures.
What's that?
How did you get these pictures? Where did they come from?
From a Jew in Bialystok. I'll give you his name off air. He owns thousands of Polish photos that look just like this, most of them taken by, you won't be shocked, the Wehrmacht. I mean, who else is taking these photos? The Wehrmacht is. As you probably know, Hitler intended on wiping out all world Jewry and having a museum boasting about his accomplishments. So they needed as much photo and video evidence of what they were doing. Obviously, tens of thousands of that were destroyed, but thousands of photos and videos did survive. I'll give you the guy's name. Here's another photograph, September 7th to the 11th, 1939, the same square with the German soldiers cutting the payas off of a Velichka Jew.
You know, there are not a lot of these pictures around, by the way.
I know. Yeah, same market square, except this photo, I know for a fact, is September 12th, 1939. This is the day that the 32 men that were rounded up, one of which was my grandfather, it started like this, using brooms to sweep. You see the Poles all having a good time laughing. And what was different on this day is there was an operation that was in play, and that was they told the public, we're taking them out for a labor job somewhere else. Right. And they went to a nearby forest, lined them up, gunned them down.
And how old was your dad at this time? 9
years old. So you can see on the far right, I blew this up. There's two German soldiers bringing yet another Orthodox Jew to the square.
Jeez.
I have a whole story in the book on
Stunning.
how.
Stunned.
What's that?
I'm stunned. I'm actually stunned.
You know, Velichka at this time became known as a city without men. On September 1st, many men in Velichka fled without their families. And my grandmother encouraged my grandfather to run, and he wouldn't. He said, I'm not abandoning the family. When the Wehrmacht came on the 7th, my grandmother said again to him, go. Most men had left, but he was not afraid. He said, I'm not leaving you. And they came to the door on the 12th and came into the house, looked for my grandfather, didn't find him because he was sleeping on a couch, and they didn't look over the other side of the couch. When the German soldier came out, the Polish boys that were loving every minute of this, being handed German candy to help point out where Jews lived on this list so they could expedite the process, they grabbed the German soldier by the arm, and my dad's watching this whole thing, and said, no, he's there. The head of household is there. Go back in there. We saw him go in not long ago. So the German soldier came back and conducted a much more thorough search and found my grandfather sleeping, woke him up, said, you have to come with me. Took him to the square, the photos I just showed you. So the photo that I showed you, the last one, my grandfather and another 24 men were rounded up within the minutes or hours after that photo was taken. Oh. So what my father learned by September 12th, 1939, and I already told you the story about the wrestler and the assaults in public school and the anti-Semitic placards. On this day, what he learned was whatever the Nazis say, whatever the German orders are, and whatever the Polish police order us to do, I will do the opposite, because they had said, we're taking you out to work. And the soldier told my grandmother, your husband will be back in the evening, because my grandmother said, can he take a coat? Can he take a hat? He said, doesn't matter. He'll be back. So my father at the age of 9 went from being a child to an adult within hours. His childhood was over. And his steadfast stubbornness in knowing to do the exact opposite of what was being ordered by the Poles or the Germans is what saved his life. And I should add, most importantly, this list was put together by a municipal worker in Velichka. The Germans got there and they tasked him with, give us a name of people that are troublemakers from a German perspective, people that are going to resist. So this municipal worker knew the town, and he knew who all the Jews that were left that should be eliminated, came up with a list, and my grandfather's name was on it. And Polish kids helped take the German soldiers around town and ensured that they would go back into my father's house. So that's how the war started for my father. That's the background on what he experienced.
Wow. All right. So then what happens to him? So 12 years
then,
old.
as my dad described it, he said things actually were pretty quiet in Velichka after this. But eventually, you know, I hate to use the word, but it's the word that was used at the time. Rumors would go around. I mean, you know, January 1942, the Wannsee Conference, final solution is put into play. Obviously, nobody knows about it outside the German command. But rumors are going around about Jews being rounded up, Jews being liquidated out of towns and out of ghettos. So where you thought you were safe, trapped in your town because you couldn't leave, it was impossible to leave Poland, or trapped in a ghetto, can't leave. Now they're being emptied out and they're being put on trains. That's the rumor. And they're being sent somewhere, and no one is ever getting to this destination and reporting back. So these are the rumors that are going around, but rumors are based on factual observation more often than not. And my dad took this to heart because he still was operating under the guise of, whatever you hear, do the opposite. So he's hearing about roundups and deportations and train rides, and he's like, I'm leaving. So at 12, he, unbeknownst to him, is going through a test run. He refused to wear the compulsory Star of David armband. He had fair colored hair, blue eyes, very, very pale skin. He didn't quote unquote look Jewish. And he was still small for his age. He felt, and Velichka was becoming overcrowded. Jews were fleeing from Krakow to the southern cities below Krakow. And with the extra foot traffic and the fact that he was small and he wasn't going to wear the armband, he thought, I'm going to blend in. No one's going to know me. And he bought a train ticket from the Velichka train station and went to Miehov, where there was family. The family was too scared to take a little boy in because it might have implicated them as hiding a Jew. And so they suggested just come here for food, but go live in the adjacent ghetto. So my dad practiced sneaking in and out of the Miehov ghetto and getting food from his aunt. When things appeared to calm down, he took the train back to Velichka, walked home, and he ended up doing the same thing to Bochnia, the Bochnia ghetto. And eventually, by August of 42, the rumors were, this is all Jews were talking about in Poland, is being deported, put on trains and taken somewhere. So my father just said, I'm going on foot. I'm leaving at the age of 12. And he left with his next youngest sister, was 14. My grandmother knew she could not leave the house with 4 daughters and a son. You would look like you're escaping. They would never make it 100 feet out of the house. They had no connections. They had no money, no way to get out. She stayed with the 3 older daughters, and they were deported to Belzec, or towards the end of the deportation, the Germans grew tired of waiting for trains to keep coming back and forth, and they just started gunning Jews down at the train station. So I don't know if his 3 sisters and his mother wound up at Belzec, which was a death camp, or if they were slaughtered right there at the train station. But that's what my father learned when he returned in 45.
Did you ever try to find out at the International Tracing Service and the Holocaust Museum?
There's no record of any of them.
No record of any of them.
No.
Wow.
No. So it's either they went to Belzec, which is where most Velichka Jews were deported to, or they were slaughtered at the Velichka station. Because after the war, when my dad registered, and so did his sister, and then they ran into each other, literally, they hung around in Poland for quite a while and kept checking the registries, and they kept asking, right, they didn't hear anything. Their names aren't showing up. You know, he knew obviously his father had been murdered.
Where did they run away to?
So after shuttling between the Miehov ghetto and the Bochnia ghetto several times, they were really running out of options, him and his 14-year-old sister, because the ghettos had been liquidated. So if Jews were found there, you were going to be killed on the spot because you had evaded a deportation. So they actually ran into someone that knew cousins on my grandfather's side that were leather workers for the SS. And they had special papers and dispensation to travel around and collect goods and resources to make custom leather products for German soldiers in Krakow. So the friend said, go find your cousins. They're in Krakow. So my dad and his sister found them. And they said, well, we can't let you work here. The Germans know who our employees are and who aren't, and they'll take you away in 2 seconds. Go hide out in the Krakow ghetto. We'll put your sister as a domestic maid at this house where we think it's safe. You hang out in the Krakow ghetto, and we'll find you a job locally in a leather worker shoe shop. So my dad did that for a while, but after the Gestapo came to the leather shop looking for someone else, it scared the daylights out of my dad, and he thought, I need to get as far away from cities as possible. So that's how he wound up on the farm. And what I jumped over is when he was with his cousins, one of them went to a priest who was selling false papers of all kinds of Poles that were killed in 39, 40, and 41 and early 42. And he had a brother-sister tandem that were close in age to my father and his sister. So he purchased it. And my father had to forget his entire Jewish upbringing and invent his own script of who he was. He had to say conveniently, my parents are dead. My siblings are dead. There's no one out there. He wasn't even going to say anything about his sister, with the sister her name was Zusha Serdel. He wasn't even going to throw that name up. He just learned an entire phony life of where he grew up, where he went to school. So that way, if he was ever questioned, the answers would roll right off of his tongue. And here he is, 12 years old, thinking like this, rehearsing like this, so that when he wound up on the farm, he's perceived as a Pole. He has his papers, and other farms, they would come and buy products at the farm he was working at, and they would ask, who are you? Where's your parents? My father had an answer for everything. But one of the most difficult things that he encountered was he had to go to church, couldn't say no, and they would have a pork dinner afterwards. And here he was, strictly kosher, like most Jews were in southeastern Poland. My dad could not cringe or make a face. He had to eat it. And it was at that point, it was probably his lowest. He's hiding out on a farm. He knows his father's murdered. He doesn't know where his mother and three sisters are. And there he is eating pork after church. How low can you go? How much worse can this get?
How did he decide? His name became, what was his name? The book.
Stashik Serdel.
My name is Stashik Serdel. How did he come up with the name? How did he?
That's what the false papers, that's who that person was a little boy that had been murdered in the Blitzkrieg. Probably in the opening 10.
Over somebody else's identity.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Wow. And the priest knew that the whole family had been wiped out in the Blitzkrieg during the first 10 days of the German invasion. So, at some point, between the age of 12 and 15, my father thought to himself, on the farm, shivering cold, wearing the same clothes for 3 years, with inadequate availability of hygiene products. Is this my forever? Will I ever see a Jew again? What am I really living for? What is my future? A world without Jews and people I know, and I'm becoming someone else? Somehow my dad got through it, and next thing you know, the bombs are dropping and the Russians are fighting at that very fortress I showed you earlier. They've advanced that far into Poland, and they were successful. They busted the German line. The Germans were retreating west, and the Soviets kept going. And my father was liberated, but he still had to fake that he was Stashik Serdel because he wasn't quite sure where to go. And he went on foot to Krakow, and he saw no Jewish faces. All the Jewish stores were unoccupied. Businesses, there's no one around. People he thought he knew, they're not there. He doesn't know where they are. Eventually, he goes back to his town. I told you briefly the story of him going to his family home and what he experienced. And, it was very difficult to get out of Europe. And you know that as well as I.
Where did he end up? He ended up in a DP camp, I assume.
No, they stayed on the run. Those cousins, 3 of them survived. There was five brothers. The one that bought the false papers was killed. One was a Sundar commando at Auschwitz. He survived, ended up going to Israel. But the 3 others, and then became 2. 2 others survived. They needed to go to New York. They were in Czechoslovakia. They were in Belgium. They were in France. They went back to Poland. They went back to Belgium. They went back to Poland. They didn't know where to go. And the Iron Curtain was coming down. And it was so bad in those other countries, both culturally, anti-Semitic wise, and Sovietization of society. Poland at that point in 48, 49 was actually safer for them than those other countries. But then the DP Act was passed in 51, and they all left for New York.
Wow.
My dad's with cousins and one sister, and he's at that point he was 21, but when the war was over, he was 15. It took 6 years to get out of Europe.
Wow.
They didn't have passports.
Right.
And without a passport, how are you going to get anywhere? And no one wanted refugees at the end of World War II. No one wanted Jews. And they go back to Poland and they figure out we really don't want a reissued Polish passport. That's not going to help us.
I'm surprised he didn't end up in one of the DP camps, in one of the refugee camps.
No, they kept on the run until that act passed. And then they were issued Belgium passports, which I have a picture of up on the website. and in the book. And with that, that's how he got to New York.
So we're already an hour into this thing, but I'm enjoying the discussion and I'm learning so much about, again, every story is unique. Your father's story is a movie. I see a movie. It could easily be a movie because every one of these stories needs to be told somehow.
You're right,
You know?
and I'm actually talking to a documentarian as we speak.
Well, and I think it should be a documentary. I think it should be a feature film, even short films. Nowadays you could make a 3-minute film of just one scene. I love the story of your grandfather, and taking down all the signs and then having them all come out of the church thinking they're going to kill him. And instead they stand and applaud. That's like a 3-minute short film or a 5-minute film.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I've made several of these now, and it's fascinating. And they're doing well. They win awards all over the world at film festivals. So just give us now, the end of the story. He comes to New York. What does he do, and how does he end up in LA?
He learned different trades: carpentry, plumbing, electricity. Got odd jobs doing that in New York, and he was legitimately trained in doing those things. I don't know exactly what led him to LA other than one of those cousins relocated there. So he followed along with his sister. She dies shortly after that of cancer. But my dad thought, this is an up and coming area. It seems like business is on the up and up here. There's a lot of growth. And he took out a small business loan and he opened up a mom and pop, sundry store, liquor store, little foodstuffs, and a Jewish area of LA. And that's how he made his living before he eventually met my mom. And he never told her much either. He didn't want to relive it. At the end of the show a tape, the interviewer asked my dad, why now? And instead of answering why now, which the answer was the Schindler's List movie and the creation of the foundation, he just said, I never wanted to burden my wife and my sons with what happened to me. I don't want to be seen as a victim. I don't want people to feel sorry for me that my family was slaughtered. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want to think about it. And that explained it. And there was probably no way I was ever going to get him to talk. But the movie opened him up, and having an official interviewer from a foundation eventually convinced him that it was important enough to do. And after that, then he wants to talk, and I shut down. So it was a long road.
You wrote the book. So number one, what are your plans for the book? How long ago did you write and publish the book?
It was published in July of 2020 by Sunbury Books. And I do these presentations both in person when COVID allowed it and mostly on Zoom when not. But yeah, I have a lot of things lined up for this year, one of which is you. And talking to a documentarian and
How can people buy the book? Just everywhere? Amazon?
On Amazon. But very simply, my author webpage is joelporemba.com. I have a lot of content up there. One of the tabs, Amazon, takes you right to Amazon to purchase the book. But I have a lot of content, a lot of photographs from the book are up there. I tell part of the story on the webpage because if you're not going to buy the book or can't buy the book, wherever part of the world you're in, at least you can understand what one Jew went through. And oddly enough, I received a message from a Jewish gal in Poland that was in graduate school. And she was then in the grant writing business. And she said, I found your father's video on the USC Shoah Foundation website. Can I interview you? And I said, well, obviously you heard about me because I just published a book. And she said, I didn't know. I mean, so she goes to the website. She's like, oh my God, this is a bigger thing than I thought. The grant has to do with survive. I have to write about a survivor from Velichka of all places. Oh, wow. So I found your father's name on the Shoah Foundation website. I watched his video. and I wanted to interview you. And this is for her writing of a grant. And I said, I'm happy to be interviewed, but check out my webpage. A couple of weeks later, she tells me she bought the book. She read the book. She can't even believe this story. And she has much, much more to write about than what my dad provided in the interview, because that was only 4 hours. And, he kind of linearly followed the interviewer's train of thought and questions. So there's plenty of his story in the video, but, she realized after the website that there was so much more. So she bought the book and, and then she talked to me, and that came out of nowhere. It had nothing to do with writing the book. It had to do with her finding the video on the USC show website. So
that's amazing. Listen, I would love to take this conversation offline, only because we're already over an hour. And I hope that you and I will continue this conversation, because I have a funny feeling that there's a lot in the future for you and this amazing book. My name is Stashik Surdel by Joel Poremba. Go to joelporemba.com. And, I feel like every story deserves to have some kind of medium available to it. You wrote a book about your father's story, which is amazing. I have a book. My mom actually wrote her own book, and I helped her to get it published and out in the world. But I feel like every one of the videos at the Shoah Foundation should be a booklet. Every one of them should be a little movie. All of these stories need to be remembered. All of these stories need to be told. And we haven't even gotten to what's happening today in Europe with Russia and Ukraine and the refugees, and never again is now. And you know what? We didn't, as a society, learn the lessons that your father and my father had to tell. And here we are, reliving the same old.
Yeah, anti-Semitism as the world's oldest hatred has never ceased since the Holocaust. Not ceased at all.
No question about it. But what I'm finding is it's not even anti-Semitism anymore. It's just dictatorships. It's this idea that one guy can decide that he wants to, murder all of these people. And then he just does it. And the world stands by and goes, oh, no, you really shouldn't do that. That's a bad thing.
Yeah, we're hearing
like that.
Right. We're hearing the same things today. You shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that.
Right. There are 12,
but no one's actually going to do anything about it.
Well, hopefully they will. And hopefully they have. And hopefully we will continue to learn the lessons of your father, my father. And maybe someday we'll be able to look back and say that humanity finally learned some lessons, so we don't have to repeat history.
Well, that's why we do these things. And I thank you for hosting me today.
It's been my honor, my pleasure. And you and I have a lot to talk about, Vilechka, and
we do
other things. Ladies and gentlemen, Joel Poremba. The book is My Name is Stashik Surdel. Go to joelporemba.com, and please visit our website at whyilovejewish.org. Go to our YouTube channel and please subscribe. And we will continue to bring you, with your support, all of these amazing life stories. Joel, thank you so very much for being part of our schmooze, and I look forward to our continuing relationship. And if there's anything we can do to help, we will.
God bless. Thank you, Avi.